The last time you popped a question into ChatGPT or asked AI to create an image for you, did you think about what would have to happen behind the scenes to make that happen? AI relies on data centers to provide the computer power and storage to run complex machine learning models. It's used by all kinds of industries and professions, from healthcare to science to financial services. And in order to meet the demand for more AI processing, the world needs more data centers. Bell Canada currently has plans to build 6 of these centers across the country, including one on the outskirts of Regina. I'm Nicole Huck, and today on Blue Sky, we'll learn more about this proposed project from our reporter who's been looking into it. We'll hear from organizations that help municipalities ask the right questions about how they use AI, and we want to hear from you. What do you think about Regina potentially getting an AI data center? What are the questions you have about the project or AI centers in general? You can call 1-800-716-2221 or email bluesky@cbc.ca. Well, Alexander Kwan is a provincial affairs reporter with CBC Saskatchewan. He broke the story about a 90,000 square foot Bell Run AI data center campus being planned for the outskirts of Regina. And he's with me here in studio to tell us more. Alex, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So what do we know about this proposed data center campus?
So I want to be really clear. What we know is very limited right now. Most of it is based off of documents that have been filed with the rural municipality of Sherwood. Now, that's a municipality just south of the city of Regina. Essentially, what was in front of that rural municipality, it wasn't a proposal for an AI data center. It was a application for rezoning. And that means the specifics about this center itself were not included in the documents. Here are the details we do have right now. This data center campus will be made up of an unspecified number of interconnected low-rise data center buildings. Each will have a capacity for 50 megawatts. The complex is projected to have 300 plus parking stalls, which could indicate a large workforce. It's also going to be powered by a nearby SaskPower substation, and water will come from private cisterns. It's also going to be designed to meet or exceed all environmental and regulatory requirements. So, as I said, and as we will talk about more, there are very few concrete details in here, and that is, I think, allowing a lot of misunderstanding or assumptions to kind of fill in the gaps for people who are just hearing about this project now.
So who's building it?
So what we know is that it is a project by Bell Canada. The application in front of the RM of Sherwood was put forward by a numbered company, meaning that on its face, there's no clear indication of who was behind it, except that there was that effort to have some level of kind of secrecy was kind of undercut by the supporting letters in front of the RM. They make it clear this is part of Bell's AI Fabric project. Now, that's Bell Canada's plans to build out AI capacity in Canada.
And where is this supposed to be built?
So the documents filed with the RM of Sherwood propose rezoning a parcel of land measuring approximately 65 hectares. It's going to be south of the Sask Polytechnic campus in Regina. Now, the rezoning would allow for the construction of this planned artificial intelligence data center rather than its current agricultural use. Now, I've been out to this field. I've been out to where this proposed site is located. It is essentially just an empty field right now. Right across the street is this SaskPower substation, which would, I think, the plan is to have that power this facility. But right now it's empty. But of course, the plan is to build something fairly quickly. And the promise, so right now it might be an empty field, but that could soon change.
And for people outside of Regina, it's very close to the Sask Polytechnic and the University of Regina.
Yeah, it's right south of them. So even though it's outside of the city of Regina's borders, because it is within the RM of Sherwood, it is right next door.
Spitting distance.
Exactly.
So what's the timeline for this project?
So you are going to hear this a lot from me today. It's unclear. We don't have that information. What we do know is that the documents make mention of this project being built in phases, with phase 1 of the project involving construction of an 8,500 square meter building. The plan, according to those documents, is to expedite construction of that phase 1 sometime this year.
So what has been the response so far?
University of Regina and Sask Polytechnic have both endorsed the zoning changes. In Sask Polytechnic's letter of support for the rezoning, they write, "We've been following the Bell AI Fabrics approach at their sites across the country, and their track record on waste heat capture and district heating is strong. They have committed to providing thermal energy to neighboring institutions at no cost, a move that could significantly reduce carbon emissions associated with campus heating. The closed-loop cooling design, combined with the Saskatchewan climates results in a highly efficient facility." Now, Chris Yost, the U of R Vice President of Research, also endorsed this project. He says the university stands to benefit from the data center's construction, calls the center an opportunity to advance research, education, and its work around commercialization. Now, the City of Regina has also been made aware of the proposal. They waived a requirement for concept and secondary plan for this rezoning application, according to the package of documents filed with the RM of Sherwood. Now, Chad Bashinsky, the mayor of Regina, was asked about this earlier today on the Morning Edition with Adam Hunter. This is what he had to say.
Now, I know modern data centers, many of them now are closed loop systems that don't use a lot of water. It's more of a radiator in your car kind of a situation. But those are the design details that we haven't seen, that hasn't come forward yet. And so if they do, there will be a very, very strict review to make sure that there is no risk to the City of Regina's water.
So that's the City of Regina, but have we heard anything from the province?
Yeah, the Water Security Agency, SaskTel, the Ministry of Highways did not raise any concerns with the proposed zoning changes, according to the documents. But I do want to make it clear, the endorsement of the provincial government, these crowns, they don't mean they're endorsing the project itself necessarily. They are merely endorsing the zoning change because that was what was in front of them.
Now, not everyone's on board. There's been some opposition to this proposed data center. I've seen petitions circulating. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, there are definitely several petitions circulating in Regina. There's a letter-writing campaign. The Morning Edition spoke to one of the people who launched one of those letter-writing campaigns. JJ Big Sky he lives in Regina. He's hearing a lot of concern from his community.
Many concerns about its environmental impact and whether it's a tool that we use for good or whether it's a tool that we do not use for good.
And what have you been doing to get this? Are you planning to talk to City Council, to talk to MLAs? Or what's the plan going forward?
There is definitely plans to speak up at City Council. There have already been there's a petition going around, over 5,000 signatures on it already. In addition to that, we're calling, we're emailing, we're letting our voices be heard because we can't be silent about this issue.
And our colleague, Louise Big Eagle, reached out to George Gordon First Nation, who owns the land that's directly adjacent to this proposed data center. They didn't respond to requests for comment, but she did get a hold of Jana Pratt, an activist who lives in Regina but is from George Gordon First Nation.
As First Nations, we're always water is life. And I was one of those people that did go to Standing Rock, to protest about how important water is. And so that is a major concern of mine.
So obviously a lot of questions about water usage and the effect on the grid.
Absolutely. There is a lot of concern about water usage because of reporting out of the United States and other areas about data centers being built there or have been built already. And I will say that I spoke with David Mayer. He is an assistant professor of engineering at the University of Toronto. He looks at infrastructure specifically around water usage. He says water usage can be a valid concern, especially with existing infrastructure.
The drivers of water use kind of go agriculture, then urban, and AI is growing and consuming water. It uses water differently, but so far, at least, the amount it's using sounds like a very large amount, but compared to how much the humans in a city use, it's not that much. But it uses it all at once and all in one place, and so depending on the pipes that connect the AI data center to the rest of the city or to its water source, it can have a local straining effect.
So that is what he said. But the info we have right now is, again, very, very, very limited. What we do know is that the AI data center would have private cisterns. That's where it would get its water from. But we don't know if it had to be connected to the city of Regina's water. We don't know how much water those private cisterns would have. We don't even know necessarily how that water would be used outside of that kind of reference from Sask Polytech to using this water cooling system. So, again, we really don't know a whole lot. And I think that is one of the concerns for a lot of people just trying to find out information about this is that there just isn't that much information in front of them.
And the group that does have that information...
Well,
Bell.
that is a Bell. We reached out
Yeah.
to them. They largely did not respond to a lot of our requests for comments. In our initial reporting, they didn't respond, but just this week, they sent a statement acknowledging that they are working with municipalities across Canada to deliver data infrastructure. It says they have no announcement to make at this time, so again, no clear acknowledgement even of this proposed data center in Regina, and unfortunately, a continued lack of information for people who are, I think, scrambling to find information. So it's I think a frustrating part for us who are trying to share information, and then people who want to find that out.
Yeah, so Belle, if you're listening, let's talk. And Alex, what will you be watching for in the next while here?
Well, we know that the RM of Sherwood is not the only one with interest in an AI data center. The RM of Edenwald, which is another RM just outside of the city of Regina, they had a public hearing around a bylaw change that would include data centers as a usage in its planning bylaw. Now, that doesn't mean a proposal is happening in the RM, but it does mean it could be somewhere down the line. As for the project in the RM of Sherwood, I'll keep checking their council agenda because any kind of new details on that project will likely appear in front of that council before anyone else. And especially when Bell isn't necessarily sharing any information with us, it might come through filings with them.
Awesome. Well, Alex, thanks so much for your work on this story, and I know that you'll be keeping an eye on it and you'll be bringing us information as you get it.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
That's Alex Kwan. He's a reporter at CBC Saskatchewan. We are talking about AI data centers today. If you have questions, if you have thoughts on this, you can call 1-800-716-2221 or you can email bluesky@cbc.ca. Now, we know AI is continuing to play an increasingly bigger role in businesses, government, and our communities. But what happens when people who aren't techies are making decisions around AI? Our guests today say it's important that municipalities know the right questions to ask so they can make informed decisions. Maren Loan is a name that may be familiar to Saskatoon listeners. She served as a city councillor in that city for 13 years, and now she works with the organization Urban Climate Leadership, where she focuses on AI in cities. Maren, welcome to Blue Sky.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for being here. And Simon Enoch is with the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives. He just co-authored a paper titled, "You're Getting a Data Center. Here's What to Know." Seems like appropriate person for being on the show today. Simon, welcome back to Blue Sky.
Thank you so much for having me.
So I'm just curious about your initial reactions to this. So when you first heard that there might be a AI data center coming on the outskirts of Regina, what was your first reaction, Simon? I'll come to you.
Kind of like what Alexander said, details. I want details because we can't really size up the impact and effect of this data center until we have more details. We need to know the size. We need to know how much energy it's going to consume. We need to know how much water it's going to consume, how many jobs are promised, all these sorts of details that so far we just don't know.
And this piece that you wrote, I mean, it's not just Regina, right? This is something that we're seeing across the country.
Yes, absolutely. Canada's just starting to experience its own data boom, investment boom, but we have the experience of the United States, which has already gone through this, didn't have much in the way of rules and regulations to begin with, and so it's kind of a mess down there. So we need to learn from their mistakes.
Maren, what about you? What was your first thought when you heard that Regina might be getting one of these centers?
Well, as Simon said, I think it was only a matter of time before this trend hit home in Saskatchewan. And with the federal focus on increasing, quote unquote, sovereign data infrastructure in Canada, we can expect more of these. But as a recovering city councilor, my thoughts went immediately to the kinds of information I would want to make a good decision on behalf of my community. And I think it's a very overwhelming process. This is a new type of land use for decision makers to contemplate. And so what was on my mind is, what are the questions that you need to ask to get at good information to make a good decision for your residents?
Marion, you work with cities as they incorporate AI into their communities. How have you seen the use of AI change in recent years? Just how big a deal is it now compared to even a year and a half ago when you were on council?
Well, it's interesting. I think we talked about AI 2 or 3 times when I was on city council, at the council level, and things have changed very dramatically in the last 2 years. I think there are lots of interesting ways that AI and cities are crossing paths. I would say in 2 general categories. One is internally in terms of the way that cities are using AI in their operations, and there are lots of examples of that. Of course, we have a bit of a climate focus at Urban Climate Leadership, so we look to cities all over the world that are using AI and machine learning, often traditional AI and not generative AI, to support their operations. And then the more emergent category is really what happens when AI infrastructure comes to town, and what implications does that have for a local community's environmental welfare, for their electrical needs, and for their water consumption. So those are kind of the 2 ways in which we see cities grappling with AI right now.
Do you find that communities do have the expertise needed to make informed decisions around AI and data centers?
Over the last year, Urban Climate Leadership has been consulting with local governments and related stakeholders, and we've heard a couple really prominent themes emerge from those conversations. One is that AI is of interest to cities. They want to use it as best they can to support all kinds of operations, but also their climate work. But really only 23% of cities are using AI right now because it can be quite overwhelming, and many smaller municipalities lack the governance or policy infrastructure that would be required to successfully implement AI in a way that's climate and equity informed. And then the second thing we're hearing is just overwhelm at the prospect of navigating a major land use decision around data centers. We will see more of these, and we are going to see them in rural locations, RMs with small administrative capacity. And so it is, I think, overwhelming for local governments to tackle these kinds of questions.
Do you think that's strategic?
Well, I don't think that it is an accident that municipalities with large availability of unfettered land are attractive. These are very large facilities, and so it's a lot easier to build a new data center in a rural location than it is in a very constricted urban space. But, there are implications that are difficult to sort out around water consumption and energy grid impacts. And what we've seen in rural locations in the United States is really significant impacts for residents, particularly around electrical bills. In some cases, the power source of those data centers can create nuisance and public health issues. And so it's really important. And as Simon said, we have an opportunity as a country here to learn from lessons all over the world. I'd say the United States offers lessons that we should avoid. And then some lessons from places like Scandinavia about how you can manage these things really well.
I want to get to all of that, but I want to bring in an email first. Carol writes, transparency is the most important part of this endeavor. It has not felt very transparent so far. Water is the most critical resource to protect, and our survival relies on this. Survival over greed needs to be paramount in this issue. I hope that government will be honest and trustworthy here. Take a pause and be prudent regarding our water. Let us see the evidence and projected outcomes, please. Thank you to the CBC for bringing this up for scrutiny. Thanks, Carol. If you want to join that conversation, you can email like she did at bluesky@cbc.ca, or you can call us on the phone. That's 1-800-716-2221. I'm Nicole Huck. You're listening to Blue Sky on CBC Radio. Today we're talking about AI data centers and the questions that need to be asked before these come to town. So Marion Lowen is one of our guests. She's an associate program director with Urban Climate Leadership. We're also joined by Simon Enoch. He's with the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives. Just co-authored a paper that says, so you're getting a data center, here's what to know, what questions to ask when the new data center comes to your town. So the right people for the job today. And if you have questions or you have something you want to add to the conversation, you can call 1-800-716-2221 or you can email bluesky@cbc.ca. Now, we have a federal AI minister now, which is even a new thing in itself, who has gone all in. The federal government has been seeking proposals for a large-scale AI data centers to be built in Canada. That deadline was February 15th. For their most recent proposals, the federal government says it will provide additional compute capacity for the broader domestic innovation ecosystem, including academia and industry. And I'm just curious on that front, because the project in Regina is proposed for right beside the University of Saskatchewan and Sask Polytechnic. Simon, how do you foresee groups like that potentially benefiting from this project?
Yeah, once again, I'm kind of puzzled by that particular claim because it depends on what kind of data center it is. If it's a co-location center, which is sort of where tenants rent server space from a sort of landlord, you could see how the University of Regina might bring its own servers in there and use the data center in that respect. But if it's an AI training and inference center, as Bell claims, that's a little bit more difficult to understand how there's going to be a research partnership. So I'd like to see more details on that. Certainly, they've mentioned the recapturing the heating for greenhouses. We've seen that a lot in Scandinavian countries, so that's wonderful that they're looking at that sort of spin-off effect. But in regards to the research partnership, I'd really like to see more details and get some answers in that respect.
Okay, we have a caller on the line. Brian is on the line in Yorkton. Brian, what's on your mind today?
Hello. Yeah, I'm a little surprised that small interest groups are, questioning the validity of having data centers here. Saskatchewan has to take advantage of what we have, and it's a perfect climate for data centers. So, yeah, there has to be due diligence done on, a lot of things, noise, and those other impacts, just like it is with windmills. But we need to seize the opportunity. We have a lot of socialistic policies. And this is a great way for us to use our climate over winter to provide a positive benefit as opposed to other locations, which would make up for any other small issues that might come up. But resistance to it just causes us to be more the old Sask of being poor and not reaching our full potential, especially when we can take, our land and our weather is an advantage, no earthquakes. And, it's just an enabler. It's like any other business that comes here. Manufacturing, well, they need power. As long as, Sask Power, SaskTel, these companies can provide it and it's reasonable, they're not going to build it to harm the public. They're going to build it to hopefully be profitable.
Okay, well, Brian, thanks for joining the conversation today.
Thank you.
Simon, Brian has no concerns. One of the concerns that we do hear from a lot of people, maybe, yes, the climate is in our favor for most of the year, but water isn't exactly something that we're running a plenty with in many parts of the province, especially Regina, where we truck in our water all the way from Buffalo Pound. I'm just wondering, what are some of the questions around water that you think need to be answered before this begins?
Yeah, and once again, the details, the cooling system, what is it? They say it's a closed loop system. Does that mean that it's evaporating? Does that mean it's not evaporating? Most cooling systems for AI data centers lose about 80% of their water to evaporation. So is that happening? If that is happening, then you're going to have to recharge it pretty frequently. If they're not using water, are they using refrigerants? Those have to be disposed of. They can be quite toxic. So once again, there's just a host of problems here, or a host of questions here that need to be answered. And if we are going to welcome data centers into our province, which I have no real argument against, as long as we maximize the benefits and we minimize the negative consequences to the communities that are going to host them.
Marion, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I think this is really a question not about if data centers are coming, but the way in which they can be managed and regulated to provide the best outcomes for communities in Saskatchewan. And I'm very sympathetic as a former politician to the promise and the draw of an economic development opportunity. It's very difficult to say no to those. And so really what you want to do is find a way to get to a yes, which is sustainable. I think it is important, in addition to some of the comments we've heard about water, to really consider the grid impacts, because one thing that Saskatchewan has as an advantage is its climate, and a disadvantage that we have, which we share with many American jurisdictions, is an antiquated electrical grid with several substantial infrastructure deficits. And one of the reasons that power has become such a hotbed issue in the United States is because many jurisdictions that get data centers do not have a legislative requirement for those data centers to pay for their own power upgrades. So what happens is, if you need infrastructure upgrades, transmission upgrades to connect those data centers to the grid to supply adequate power, the cost of those upgrades goes on household electrical bills throughout the state or throughout the region. There are, to the best of my knowledge, no provisions in Saskatchewan that would prevent that from happening. And so it's important to think about intergovernmental cooperation on these files. We've also heard, from the mayor of Regina, who will almost certainly have substantial impacts to their municipality, but this is a decision happening outside of the city limits. So it requires regional government cooperation, and it requires, the province to be thinking about protecting residents from paying for transferred costs from the tech sector, who can absolutely afford to pay for those upgrades. I will point to Bill 8 in Alberta as an example of this in another jurisdiction in Canada.
Tell us a little bit more about Bill 8.
Well, Bill 8 is a piece of legislation that really is designed to facilitate more data center development in Alberta. But one thing that the government of Alberta has done is put in place the requirement for new data centers to pay for their own power upgrade costs. So in essence, if you need a new substation in order to run your data center, then the proponent pays for that, and it doesn't go on, the power utility bills in the neighboring households. In the United States, there are some jurisdictions where power bills have gone up almost 300% in the last 5 years because of data center density. So that's something we absolutely want to work to avoid when we are thinking about new data centers in Saskatchewan. One thing I'd say about Bill 8 in Alberta is that it also allows for on-site power generation. And as an organization that's thinking about climate impacts, this is not such a positive feature of that bill, because it can increase electrical generation from emissions-heavy sources. Diesel generators are a very common backup, or natural gas plants. And so that's something to think about, too, is the overall emissions cost for these kinds of facilities. There's a statistic I read recently, which, if all of the data centers currently proposed in Alberta were to be approved, which excludes the new proposal in Olds, Alberta, which is the largest in the country, if those were all approved, they would require more than double the average daily electricity for the entire province of Alberta. So it's a very substantial increase in electrical demand if all of these were to go through.
Yeah, I was reading about that project in Olds this morning, and it was estimated that daily it would take as much energy as the entire city of Edmonton uses on a daily basis. So just to give some context for what kind of demand we're talking about here. We've got some people on the line, and we also have an email. So maybe I'll go to the phone lines first. Roger is on the line in Regina. Roger, what's on your mind?
Yeah, hi. Speaking of all the energy, that's exactly where I was headed. I'd like to think that I'm not a proponent of AI, and I try not to use it because I don't think as a society we should be using energy so we can see pictures of squirrels on skateboards. I appreciate that there's a lot of other things that AI does, but I just wonder, in my own day-to-day, if I'm asking my smartphone to solve a simple math problem, like, what is 54 times 63, am I using AI when I do that?
You know what? That's like we could do 5 other shows, Roger, just on the amount of maybe water energy that is used when people are doing AI searches. But I think you bring up a really interesting point that I don't think a lot of people even recognize or realize how much energy is actually involved in little simple searches that they're doing, and that is definitely education that I think needs to happen. So, Simon, you were nodding along.
There's been multiple attempts to try and quantify what a very basic ChatGPT prompt.
With a squirrel and a skateboard.
Yeah, and for water, someone said that it's like a few teaspoons, but other people have said it's like consuming an entire bottle of water. So, like I said, it all depends on the data center. It all depends on the sort of systems they have in place. So it's really uncertain right now.
Mm-hmm. Maren, do you have thoughts?
Yeah, there are lots of different types of AI. When we hear about AI recently, a lot of that has to do with generative AI, which is squirrel and a skateboard AI. There are other kinds of AI prompting, and there are resources available for people who want to learn about what is sometimes called green prompting, ways to use AI that are energy efficient. But at a community level, I think one of the questions that I think communities need to ask if they're thinking about data centers coming to their communities is, what type of data center is it? As Simon mentioned, there are lots of different kinds of data centers, and they all function quite differently. Some of the most intensive in terms of their water and energy needs are AI training and inference centers, which is, as I understand it, what's proposed in the RM of Sherwood. And so there are lots of different types of data centers out there, and data centers aren't new. In fact, data centers are used for things that we all use daily, like cloud storage, video storage, and so forth. The thing that's different here is just the substantial increase in density and number of these types of facilities, and the disproportionately high energy and water needs of those facilities. So that's what's led to the shift and a lot of the political discourse in the United States in trying to mitigate the environmental and sort of household quality of life issues that are present in some regions in the States.
And just help us understand, because there are data centers that currently exist in Saskatchewan, but this is different, and how?
As I understand it, this is, for one thing, a larger facility and used for a different kind of data storage and movement. So I think in very simple terms, the complexity of the tasks at an AI inference or training hyperscale center are much more substantial than a conventional data storage type of data center. We've all experienced a laptop getting hot when you use it for a long time. That's because the chips, the computing chips, are getting hot. The same thing happens in data centers, and that's why we hear about the need to cool these facilities. And so obviously it's just the same kind of phenomenon on a much larger scale. And that's why it's important for, I think, communities to even think proactively about zoning designations for data centers, the kinds of provisions they might want to put in place about size and use. But the AI data centers are the kinds of data centers that are really driving this boom across North America and around the world.
Thanks. We have Kathy on the line in Regina. Kathy, what's on your mind?
Well, okay, so first off, I just want to say I certainly have the most serious concern about water consumption to be revealed for more information. But as I'm hearing about this, I'm thinking about when windmills were first introduced as an energy source, particularly in eastern Canada, but they've certainly spread elsewhere too. And where we're learning about long-term effects, and I am thinking about residual hearing effects and residual low-grade sounds, frequencies that we're not necessarily really aware of, but have long-term health implications. And once people are living in fixed communities, that becomes a huge, huge issue. And these are health and lifestyle issues for whole populations. I'd like to hear if your guests can have any knowledge about the residual effects of changes in frequency or sound that comes out of these buildings.
Thanks, Kathy. Simon, I'm going to go to you because that is one of the questions that was on the list of questions from the Center for Policy Alternatives. Go ahead.
Yeah, certainly in the United States, you have these data centers sited very close to residences, like maybe a few hundred yards. And people have reported difficulty falling asleep, health-related difficulties, because of this sort of constant low drone that hits some sort of hertz capacity. Like, I'm not a sound guy, so I don't know. But that sort of is just below the sort of noise ordinance threshold. And so a lot of these noise ordinances are just designed for sounds in the day, where this thing runs 24 hours, right? So in the dead of night, you're getting this low sort of grade drone, and it tends to drive people crazy from some of the reportage that I've seen.
I don't like the sounds.
No.
We got an email from Thomas who says he's worked as an IT professional for 20 years, and he writes, the vast resource costs of data centers are based on multiple factors: regulation, technical constraints, and integration into local corporate infrastructure. Some of these costs can be mitigated and some cannot. The concerns of environmental impacts and research leaching should be considered, and a plan put in place to mitigate the worst costs associated with these impacts. But modern society will require more and more access to information at a faster rate. We will need to build new data centers. We can have them built in the traditional locations of BC, Ontario, and the U.S., or we can gain both local and national sovereignty over how our data is managed. So that came to us from Thomas, and I want to talk about that about AI sovereignty, because in Manitoba, Premier Wab Kinew says that province is ready to join the AI data center tech race. He says it's part of achieving AI sovereignty. He says people will be able to rely less on storage and cloud computing services offered by Google, Microsoft, and the U.S. tech giants. So I'm curious about your thoughts on that. Simon, maybe I'll come to you first.
Sure thing. I mean, data centers are the sort of material infrastructure of the internet, not just AI. As Marin was sort of talking about. So we need it. We do need it. If we want to use the internet and we want to ensure that our data is secure, not on American servers, I think a lot of us would have concerns about allowing our data to exist on American servers given the nature of the government down there. So certainly if we want to continue using the internet, I think we all agree we do, we're going to have to build these things. Best that they're built here, best that they're built under conditions that maximize their positives for the communities within which they're sited and mitigate the negatives.
Marin, we're talking about Manitoba here, but they are a little bit different there as well because their grid is primarily hydro. Ours, fueled in large part by coal. Does that change things, or what are your thoughts on Manitoba's quest to be at the forefront of this?
Well, I think two things. I would say that the federal government's ambitions around data sovereignty are, I think, as Simon has said, there's lots of good reasons for that. I think this is one of the reasons we can expect for this issue to become more prevalent in local governments across the country. And I would also say that I think although Manitoba has a cleaner grid, some of the same questions would remain no matter where a data center is sited, because certainly a data center located in a jurisdiction with a dirtier grid, Saskatchewan or Alberta, would lead to a greater number of greenhouse gas emissions. Some of the same questions, I think, should be considered across all provinces. For example, a question that a local government should ask a proponent is if you have power disruptions, what is the backup power source for your data center? In the United States, a large number of data centers, in fact, the vast majority of data centers, and this is going back to the question of the previous caller, are using diesel generators as a backup power source. And those, of course, have a high emissions cost of nitrous oxides. And in fact, in some particularly dense regions in the United States, residents are making complaints not only about noise, but about air quality. And so I think understanding the grid and its relative cleanliness and its relative risk for GHG is one piece. And then understanding how these facilities would power themselves in the event of power disruption is another question. It's very common for data centers to need excess on-site power, and that's a thing that local governments can regulate.
Now, Marin, putting on your old city council hat, you were talking earlier about just how nice it is for municipalities to be able to have a source of income, jobs, revenue, tax revenue. What are some of the questions that you'd be asking around that, around job creation, tax revenue, that kind of thing?
Yeah, well, I think part of getting a good deal is understanding not just, the environmental impacts, but some of the broader community impacts. I know that this site has looked at traffic, for example. That's an important question. But I think one thing that's important for prospective host communities to understand is what a realistic output or expectation would be around job creation. Really, really large facilities can sometimes produce as few as 50 permanent full-time jobs. 50 to 100, I think, is probably a reasonable expectation for a smaller facility. But again, I don't want to speculate too much without having many of the relevant details of this facility. But where a lot of the job creation comes from in a new data center is actually in its construction and not in its operation. So I think it's important for communities to ask those questions and to understand what the long-term regional economic development prospects are. Certainly an incredible opportunity during the capital expansion phase, but operationally, these are not typically huge employers.
Okay. There's still time. If listeners want to get involved in the conversation, they can call 1-800-716-2221 or they can email bluesky@cbc.ca. We have Nick on the line from Swift Current. Nick, welcome to Blue Sky.
Yes, good afternoon. I really am not as concerned about the use of the AI facility in terms of its water. Like we have a lot of other high-end users like K&S Potash, who uses about 30,000 cubic meters of water a day. Now, this facility, I doubt, would even touch any of that. So that's one issue. The other issue is, I think that since we're starting out with the AI facility, we should get them to put solar panels on their roof and basically try and get them to supply much of their own electricity instead of selling them electricity or whatever. But the water consumption is, I think it's really almost a red herring because these other facilities use way, way more water than anything like that would use. Anyway, those are my thoughts, and I hope that you can resolve the issue a bit.
Thanks.
And get them to be more specific in their application.
Thanks for the call, Nick. I appreciate that. That was Nick in Swift Current. Simon, you were nodding along to some of that. I was wondering what you were thinking listening to that. I mean, Nick's making the point that, well, we have other industries that use more water.
Yeah, I mean, he's correct. Compared to other industries, data centers aren't sort of profligate sort of consumers of water. Like compared to a golf course, way more water. I think the question is priorities, right? We live in a water-stressed environment, both Saskatchewan and Alberta. What are our priorities? Who gets first crack at this? Do we want to sort of send water to a potash solution mine, or do we want to send water to a data center that might not create as much economic spin-offs and impact? So it's a really good question that was raised. Unfortunately, the amount of power that these centers need, you would need an awful lot of solar panels, and I don't think anyone is going to be buying that much land. So right now, as sort of Marin alluded to, the vast majority of what are called behind-the-meter power for data centers are natural gas turbines, which also not only emissions problems, but also are quite noisy.
Marin, did you have any thoughts on that call from Nick?
Yeah, I think it's a great question and point that this is, relatively speaking, maybe not the biggest water consumption industry in the region. But I think the question for decision makers is, what is the cumulative effect of high water usage facilities in a particular region? And as a former councillor, we would often review facilities, industrial facilities, new facilities, with the perspective of what are the impacts of the water use of this facility on our fire flows, for example. Can we get the water pressure we need for fire suppression in the region if we say yes to this project? What are the impacts on other regional economic development priorities? Does saying yes to this data center mean we may need to say no to other facilities in the region in order to have sufficient water? And also, we just don't have very much information about the system. Nick might be right that relative to a mine, this is going to use very little water, but depending on the type of cooling system that's in place, it might use a lot of water. There was a recently approved data center in Etobicoke, Ontario, that it's estimated will use 1.2 billion liters of water a year. And so a question that I think needs to be asked is, what is the consumption on a net basis? And then what's going back into the system? Right now, the information we have about the Sherwood application is that it will be sourced from water cisterns, but it doesn't speak to any detail about how water leaving the facility will re-enter the watershed. So these are the kinds of questions that are quite specific to individual applications and need to be surfaced through the decision-making process in order to plan responsibly for the region.
Yeah, and a cistern, which maybe is drawn from an aquifer, which is not unlimited amount of water.
That's right.
We have an email from Kelly who writes, "Thank you for addressing this matter. I have mixed thoughts regarding the proposed data center adjacent to our city. While I think the economic benefits are significant, due diligence needs to be taken to ensure electrical, water, and environmental and noise issues need to be addressed. This will take coordination between the province, SUMA, and SARM to ensure all constituents are heard. The provincial government needs to be very present on this particular data center due to the environmental noise impact, considering that a new long-term care facility is being built only a few hundred meters from the proposed data center. If the data center is as noisy as has been documented, it's hard to think of two less congruent neighbors. I would not want my loved ones living out their final years in a place where they can't go outside because of the noise. There are no simple solutions, only intelligent choices. Let's encourage our leaders to make smart choices." And that came to us from Kelly. Now, we're coming up. We only have about 4 minutes left in the show today, but I want to leave us with some of the regulations. I mean, you guys are both policy folk who like policies, who like regulations, and I think that as we're seeing, provinces across the country charting their own courses on this, Saskatchewan could be a leader. So I'm wondering, Simon, when it comes to policies that you would like to see in place around this, what do you have in mind?
Well, I would just begin by sort of saying, this is a great opportunity that we're having this debate right now and asking these questions because, like you said, so many other governments are struggling with this. How do we meet this new challenge in regards to investment? How do we invite these centers in? How do we ensure that, they're good neighbors? How do we ensure that they maximize economic spinoffs and things like that? So as we were sort of saying, we need, I think it's good to say that, these are important investments that we need to have in our province, but nevertheless, things protecting ratepayers, ensuring there's setbacks from residences, from hospitals, from long-term care centers, using noise suppression equipment if possible, full transparency on electricity and water consumption, and on e-waste. I think is vitally important.
We didn't even talk about e-waste.
I know it's like peeling an onion. But the transparency picture, I think, is vital because citizens need to know how much of their resources these facilities are consuming. And when they do know that, then I think they'll have the information. They'll be armed with the information to make much better decisions than what we're doing right now, which is a lot of speculation.
It's a lot. It's a lot of speculation, and we're filling the void with questions that we do need answer. And Marin, the last word to you. Just what are you watching for in the next coming months as we see more of these data centers popping up?
I think Simon's absolutely right here. We have an opportunity for a collaborative approach to really set a policy foundation to make data centers work for the people of Saskatchewan in an effective way. We can learn from our sort of weather compatriots in Scandinavian countries about how to make the best of these kinds of facilities. And I think local government should start by having conversations with their regional partners. This is going to be complicated regional planning work. I think we should start some public conversations with the provincial government about regulating power costs.
Okay, well, we'll put a pin in it for now, and maybe we'll have you back as we know more. So Marin Lowen is an Associate Program Director with Urban Climate Leadership. Simon Edoch is with the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives. You can read the piece he co-authored on their website.